Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. Today I'm in the garage with the KTM 390 Adventure and I'll be working on my first modification for this bike. Now I just recently bought this bike, but I quickly discovered it was in serious need of a tail tidy. The stock plate holder really isn't set up to hold a US style license plate correctly, so I'll be installing the R&G license plate bracket kit. So if you're interested in how to install one of these, I'll be doing a full walkthrough in this video. As always, I'll put a link to the parts in the description. I'll be following the fitting instructions I downloaded from R&G's website at rg-racing.com. Before we get started, I'd like to show you the issue I'm having with the stock plate holder. Now, in my opinion, the looks of the stock setup isn't really that bad. Normally, I wouldn't even be bothered enough to swap this out. The issue I'm having is that the license plate doesn't sit flush with the bracket. The screws holding the bracket to the license plate holder stick out too far, and then I can't tighten the plate all the way. As a result, I'm getting some vibration on the license plate. I thought about replacing the screws with flush mount versions and then countersinking the screw holes so that it would sit evenly with the bracket. But ultimately decided to replace everything so I could fix the plate mounting issue and clean it up at the same time. The tail tidy kit I went with is from R&G. Now I chose this one based on price and simplicity. This cost me about $135 US at the time of this video, and does not require any permanent modifications to my bike. This also includes pretty much everything you'd need to handle most installs. First thing out of the box is the tail bracket itself. This is one solid piece, and it has holes for mounting stock or aftermarket turn signals, and license plate mounting slots that will allow me to screw down my license plate flush with the bracket. Also in the box we have installation instructions, a couple of R&G stickers, and two little rubber grommets, more on those later. We have some M6 by 35mm bolts with M6 washers, two mini indicator wiring covers, two 150mm sections of heat shrink tubing, a couple of cable ties, one reflector, and two mini indicator connectors if you decide to go with aftermarket turn signals. These are nice because if you splice the new turn signals into here, they'll connect directly to the KTM wiring harness. I will not be using these connectors today. Like many installs, this one begins with removing the pillion seat. Next, the stock grab rails need to be removed. Now, I found this step a little bit tedious on my KTM 390, only because the factory decided to use red Loctite on all of these bolts. This is going to require some additional cleanup later on. Next, the tail panel needs to come off. There's a bolt on each side that holds this in place. With the tail panel out of the way, I decided this was a really good time to clean up all this red Loctite from the threads. This will make it easier to reinstall the grab handles later on. I used a small brush to remove the loose stuff, but ended up having to follow up later with a low heat gun to get the rest of it. Next, I had to cut the cable tie holding the wiring harness together. Then I needed to disconnect the rear turn signal wires. On my bike, the green is the left rear and the gray is the right rear signal. Remember to put these in the correct order when you reconnect. Next, I'll remove the license plate. As you can see here, I don't really have the ideal setup with cable ties and loose license plate screws holding this in place. And here's a look at the stock KTM license plate bracket for the US market. The next step in this install is to remove the stock plate bracket. This is done by removing the 4 bolts underneath the bracket. On my bike, I also found these to be secured using red Loctite. So again, I had to spend some time cleaning these threads so I could prepare them for installing the new bolts later on. With the 4 bolts removed, the stock bracket still held in place by some plastic clips. So I pulled the bracket downward and it popped off fairly easily. Next, I pulled the turn signal wires down through the rubber grommet and the stock bracket was removed. And here's a look at the clips that hold the stock bracket to the bottom of the bike. Since I'm reusing my stock turn signals, I'll need to remove them from the stock tail bracket. First, I'll carefully pull the wires out of the bracket. Next, I'll unbolt the lights. I'm going to save the nuts and washers because I'll need those for reinstallation later on. Here's a look at what they call the mini indicator blanking grommets that I mentioned earlier. These are just little rubber pieces that they use to fill in the extra holes in the RNG tail bracket if you decide to use mini LED turn signals in place of the stock ones. I'm not going to push these all the way in place right now since I won't be using them, but I did just want to show you where they install at. I'll be using the stock turn signals and I need these holes to be open because there's little plastic tabs on the stock turn signals that fit into these holes and it keeps the signals from turning freely in the bracket. Now I'm ready to install my stock turn signals into the RNG bracket. This is super easy. I just route the cable through the bracket, making sure that the correct light goes to the correct side. Again, my left light has a green connector on it. I'll position to make sure that the plastic tab lines up. Then I'll install the stock washers and nuts that were removed earlier. With the lights mounted, I'll make sure that I route the wires through the hole in the middle of the bracket. Next, I'll use a cable tie and secure the wires and take up the extra slack from the bottom. Trust me, this step is much easier if you do this before the bracket is mounted to the bike. I wish I could tell you that I did this on the first try, but I had to learn the hard way. Next, I'm ready to install the new bracket onto the bike. I'll be using some blue Loctite on the bolts that were supplied with the kit. To install the bracket, I need to first feed the wires back through the rubber grommet at the bottom of the bike. I'll pull the slack on the wires until the bracket is flush with the bottom of the bike. Then I'll screw the bolts into place the rest of the way and tighten them accordingly. The turn signals can now be reconnected to the bike's wiring harness. I'm going to tie down the cables with a new cable tie just to keep them out of the way. Next, I'll test the function of my turn signals and brake light to make sure everything's working correctly. With the main install finished, I need to refit the rear tail panel. Next, I'll reinstall the stock screws that hold the panel in place. After that, the stock grab rails can be reinstalled. I'm using blue Loctite on these bolts, and I'll be torquing these down to about 20 Newton meters. Finally, the seat can be reinstalled. Well guys, that's about it for the RNG tail tidy install. Hope you enjoyed the video today and found it useful. If you did, please click that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I will catch you guys on the next video.